Below this is the properties panel. We use the properties panel quite a bit. There's a lot of cool stuff inside of it. On the very top of the properties panel, we have a screwdriver and a wrench icon. This is customized to whatever you're working on right now. So for instance, if we go to the texture painting, we can see that the active tool and workspace changed to this drawing feature of all these cool stuff we can use for drawing. So it's unique for what you are currently working on. Let's go back to layout. Below this is the camera icon. So the camera icon, also known as the render properties, is to set up the properties to render. Now there's a lot of cool things you can do in this, especially in Eevee. So over here is the render engine. Currently, we're in Eevee by default. Eevee is real time. If we click on this, we can see we have workbench and cycles. I prefer using Eevee because it's real time and it's a lot faster. So we're going to keep it on Eevee. Here we have sampling. This is how much processing power should the computer do for your given image. The higher the sampling, the higher the quality, but it's going to take a lot longer. Here we have checkboxes to enable different features for the rendering. There's ambient occlusion, which is to make like skin, or a candle, where you can see like light passes through an object. It's kind of that fleshy type feel. Below that is bloom, which is for neon lights and etc. We have depth of field, subsurface scattering, which is the lighting in order to make it a bit more realistic instead of just really dark shadows. We have screen space reflections, so for mirrors and stuff. We have motion blur. You should know what motion blur is. Volumetrics, which are clouds and etc. We have performance, curves, shadows. Shadows are something you want to keep in mind if you want a sharp shadow or a soft shadow. Indirect lighting for baking the lighting. We have film. If we click on film, we can actually make the background transparent. We have simplify, freestyle SVG export, freeze pencil, freestyle, and color management. We open up color management, we can see by default, the view transform is filmic. So this is how the computer represents the colors when it actually renders stuff out. So that is the render properties, which I like to refer as the camera icon. Below that is the printer icon. And this prints out or saves the images. So there's a lot of cool stuff here. We have the resolution, the X and Y of the image that we're going to be rendering out. We have the frame rate. So we can actually customize the frame rate to be 2 frames per second or 60 frames per second. We have the frame range, which is the start and end. And below here, we have output. So output is where you're going to actually save this to. So for instance, let me click on the folder. I'm going to render an image and I'm going to put it in my downloads. I'm now going to click accept. And we can see now the output is going to that folder. So it's going to that location on my computer. Below this is the file format. So currently, if I click render, it's going to render out everything as a image, as a PNG. Now I can change this later on, and I'll get into that a bit later. So I think that's good for the printer icon, which is for the output properties. Let's now go into the layer properties. So the layer properties are for more advanced features. Is you can have advanced layers of one layer could be clear, another layer could be the actual 3D object, another layer could be the shadows. It's to divide it up even more, and that gets pretty complicated. So that's what the layer's for. If we click on this icon, which is a cone icon, this is the scene properties, and we do use this a decent amount. So the scene properties gives us information about our current scene. We can do some basic modifications. If we click on units real quick, we can see that the current unit system for Blender is metric. If we click on this, we can change that to imperial. And you can see that it changes to feet and pounds. So this is kind of like the overall like control of Blender of to keep everything uniform. So let's go back into metric. And down here we have gravity. So again, this is like universal values to control Blender with. And gravity is for physics when you're doing physics simulations. So some pretty cool stuff. Below this is the globe icon, the world properties. So the world properties is the background. It's controlling, what does the background look like, the lighting of it. So there's some cool stuff. Below that is the collection properties. Don't use that too much. And then we have, which is a orange square icon, the object properties. We do use this a lot. So currently we see we have the cube selected. So it gives us information about the object we have selected. In this case, it's the cube and the naming of it, the relationships, a lot of cool stuff. Below that is a blue wrench icon. It's a modifier. So this allows us to essentially use scripting, pre-made Blender scripts in order to modify our object. For example, we can then create a rig through a modifier. So by controlling a different object, it'll transform or bend another object. Or we can create an array. So we can duplicate an object multiple times. Below this is the particle settings. So if we want to do hair or particles, this is where we do that. Below this is a orbiting icon. And this is for the physics. So we can do collision, rigid bodies, a lot of fun stuff. Below that is constraints. So if you want to make this can only be able to move in a specific location, for example, from x0 to x1, this is where we would do it. We would add a constraint. Below this is the object data properties. So we can add vertex groups, shape keys. So adding specific data for the object. Second to last, we have the material properties. This is what makes the material, the cube, looks like the way it does. So we're going to use this quite a bit. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this, but specifically for material properties, you usually modify it in the shading workspace. If we go to the shading workspace, we can see we have the material properties down here. And you usually use the shading workspace in order to modify a material. So let's go back to layout. Lastly, we have the checkered box. So this is texture property. So if you want to import a texture, this is where you would do it.